All right, listen up, advisors. If you've been banging your head against the conference room wall trying to land high net worth clients, delegate without drama, and close prospects on the spot, today's guest has your fast track ticket. Erin Botsford, Barron's top 100 advisor and founder of the Advisor Authority, built and sold nearly $1 billion firm by systemizing everything from prospecting to team leverage. Here she is to spill exactly the playbook that she created. She now teaches advisors who want that seven-figure freedom. Erin, say hello to everybody and let everybody know who you are and what you're all about.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here, Stacey.
You're very welcome. So, in 1 minute, what was the single biggest mind shift that led you to jump in from this busy advisor to building an enterprise that you ran with?
There really wasn't one moment. Nothing in life is at a moment, but I had an experience. I was a struggling financial advisor, and I actually was going to quit. And my branch manager said, "Oh, go get some business coaching." So I enrolled in a coaching program, and in the third year, the 12th session, I was paired up with a guy to, explore our results. So I decided I'm going to go first. And I said, "I'm Erin Botsford. I'm from Dallas, Texas." And I told him 3 years ago I'd been doing $300,000 in revenue, and this year I was on target to do somewhere between 400 and 450. And I was like really happy with my progress. And then it was his turn. And he said he was happened to be in our business. Not everybody in our coaching program was in my business, but he happened to be. And he said 3 years prior, he'd also been doing $300,000 in revenue. And he said this year he was on target to do 3 million in revenue. And he said, I don't meet with all of my existing clients anymore. What I've done is I've gone out and built an entire team around me. All I do is prospect for my next ideal client. I sell the philosophy of my firm, and then I turn these new clients over to licensed members of my team. And I was like, what'd you say? You just went from 300,000 to 3 million in 3 years? He goes, yeah. And you don't meet with all your existing clients anymore? He goes, no, I built a team. And so, of course, it was time to go back to our seats. The bell had rung, and I was just flabbergasted. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of anybody that did that. And so I asked him if I could buy a few hours of his time. Fortunately for me, he said, yeah, why don't you come spend the day with me and my team, which I did. And the rest, as they say, became history because a couple of years later, I did 3 million, then 4 million, then 5 million. My business just kept growing. So that was a very big moment in my life. Let's just say that.
Wow, that's amazing. Sometimes it just takes that one person and you just, and the funniest thing is a lot of times you meet these people by chance. They just pop into your life at a sporadic moment when you least expect it, but their knowledge kind of just a few moments and a little direction can change a person's life tremendously. It's amazing how sometimes those things happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer there are no accidents. And so I may not have been prepared for it, but now anymore, the way I live my life, I look for those things, right? I anticipate, I know my next opportunity is in this podcast or this next thing, right? So I think that you put it out there, the universe responds. And I don't believe in accidents anymore.
No, I agree 100%. I believe when you put it out to the universe reacts and it does come back to you. And I do believe the same way you do. I don't think there are any accidents. I think
No.
everything is meant for a reason. And sometimes, when things happen, we may not understand why they're actually happening, but, eventually we figure it out and we realize why things happen the way they did. And a
Yeah.
lot of times it's for the best, and it works out really good. Now, what's the first strategic change an advisor must make to attract a high net worth families instead of those mass affluent?
Yeah, well, let's go back. I want to tell a story if you don't mind. And that is something that happened to me in 1992 because
Yeah.
I was a financial advisor. I'd been raised in the stock brokerage world. And, we mostly focused on the investment side of the balance sheet and
Mhm.
or retirement planning or whatever. Well, there's actually another side to the balance sheet. I call that the risk side. But
Yeah.
I wasn't taught that. I didn't know anything about it until this happened. I had a couple that came to me, and this guy was retiring from a major pharmaceutical company, and he had a lot of money, and he came in with a spreadsheet. They were going to travel for 15 years. He was only 55. So from 55 to 70, they were going to travel internationally, and then from 70 on, they were going to travel in the United States. And I thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. These people have their life planned out.
Mhm.
Well, I knew by conversations they had some kids. I knew they had some grandkids, but I really never went there. I didn't ask a whole lot about them. So the plan was all set, and about, I don't know, 6 weeks later, I get this terrible phone call that their oldest son, who was age 41, had dropped dead in the driveway. He had a massive heart attack while washing his car,
Mm.
and he had a stay-at-home wife. He had four little kids. He had
Wow.
a large mortgage. He had just borrowed $800,000 to start a new business, and he had zero life insurance.
Wow.
So whose problem do you think that became? It was my
Right.
clients. And of course, I told you before we got on the show is that my dad died when I was 11, and he left my mom with six kids and no life insurance.
Yeah.
It was almost at the time I was thinking, well, shame on me. Like I know what life looks like when that happens, but
Yeah.
I never had been taught to like look for that, right? I was taught a certain way, and so that became my aha moment, my Scarlett O'Hara moment. I'm like, as God is my witness, I couldn't have prevented the heart attack with this 41-year-old, but I could have
Yeah.
asked a whole lot more questions. And so today, my process and what I train, because I train financial advisors to really look on that risk side of the balance sheet. You can add so much more value there because most people aren't focused on that. They're focused on their entrepreneurial business, they're focused on being an executive, whatever their job is, and
Yeah.
saving money for retirement. They don't realize that there's, goblins under the rug that could come along and wreak
Mhm.
havoc because you haven't really gone there. So I would tell people, I know most advisors focus on the investment side of the equation, but my firm today, we focus on the risk side of the equation. And so we're gonna ask about you, of course. I want to know about your entire story. I want to know about your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your nieces, your nephews, your children, your grandchildren. Because I'm looking for two things. One, I'm looking for potential train wrecks, like what
Yeah.
could come along and destroy your plans for a nice, wonderful, comfortable life or whatever, and or opportunities, maybe opportunities in lifetime or a death to take care of the people or the causes you care about. Because one thing I learned, Stacey, is that there's only two things you can do with a risk. Okay,
Yeah.
first of all, you want to identify what is the risk, you want to quantify it. If that thing happened,
Mhm.
would it cause financial meltdowns? Because there's only two things. You can transfer the risk through some means. Sometimes that's buying a long-term care insurance on a mom or dad. Sometimes it's buying a term life insurance policy on that 41-year-old son because he felt like he couldn't afford it himself. I don't know, but you can either transfer it, or sometimes you just have to assume the risk. And as you know, the one risk that we all have to assume is the risk of our health, right? So
Yes.
we eat right, we exercise, we do our research. We can't transfer that risk anywhere, but almost every other risk that involves financial security can be transferred.
I'm 53 years old, and I can't tell you how many friends of mine had illnesses just sporadically come out of nowhere. How many people I've known that have had a heart attack out of nowhere because we're in that prime area, age area. And sometimes you could be the healthiest person, and it could just be in your DNA, it could be in your family, that they're just prone to, heart problems. And sometimes it could just be the way you're caring for yourself. But,
Yep.
things happen sporadically out of nowhere. Things sometimes happen because of family DNA. But, you never know what the next day is going to bring. And I think sometimes people take that for granted because they think, oh, I'm only in my early 50s or I'm in my mid 50s. Nothing's going to happen to me. But we
Mhm.
don't know what's going to happen. We never know, I think, that's a really important factor that you brought up is that we do need to plan because what happens if, especially if you have a couple of kids and with today's cost of living, and then what happens if the caretaker, the mother, is left with all these kids? How is she gonna, fend all of a sudden? If there are all these different age groups that you have to take care of, and then you have to think of college and all these other factors, how am I gonna pay the electric bill? How am I gonna pay the mortgage? These are all things you have to take in consideration. And like you said, sometimes people are just focusing on other things like their retirement and other issues that you have to think of. But, you know, most important, I think the life insurance, it really has to be addressed. And I think that's one of the least things that is addressed by many people.
Yeah. Well, I have 26 different let's call it 26 different areas that I found in my practice. And we're going to check off the boxes on all 26 before we're going to ever consider investing your money. I mean, when I was in practice, I'm not in practice anymore. Now it's what I teach advisors. And
Yes.
what's interesting is from an advisory standpoint, they become so much better advisors. And a lot of times an advisor might be listening to this and they think, well, I don't know how to fix some of these problems. For instance, I have people, some of my clients came in and they had great, beautiful lake houses. And I'm like, yeah, you got a boat? Yeah, we got a great boat. I'd say, well, how is your lake house titled? Is it in your personal name? Is it some other entity? Oh, yeah, we own it free and clear. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I go, what happens if somebody gets hurt on your property? You're a boating accident. Do you realize that because that lake house is in your personal name?
Yeah.
Not only can you be sued for everything for the value of the lake house and the boat, now you can be sued for any other asset that's in your personal name, your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts. Were you aware of that? And typically they're like, no, I mean, somebody didn't. They're like, why did my attorney tell me that? Why did my real estate agent tell me that? I'm like, I don't know, but if we work together, we got to get that fixed, right? So again, there's 26 different lines of questioning. And today I teach advisors how to be better advisors by understanding those 26 different areas. And when you can have conversations like that with people, they are glued to you forever because nobody wants to feel like they're vulnerable, right? Nobody wants to feel like I turn around and the next car accident that I'm involved in can basically risk everything that I've ever worked for. I've
Right.
had clients that, one had a teenage son driving a car in his name at a major university, hit a plastic surgeon. My client was sued for $25 million.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
what happens then? Like, how are your assets set up? It didn't happen to be a client of mine, it was a prospect of mine.
Yeah.
And that had already happened. And I'm like, here's the deal. I can't protect you. That situation already occurred. You are vulnerable. But what we're
Yeah.
going to do is fix things right now because think about it, Stacey, all of us are only one car accident away from losing everything we're worth. So how
Exactly.
are your assets structured? How are they titled? How are they positioned? Because we can't control that stuff, right? And car accident in particular, they're the number one type of catastrophe that impacts people's financial lives. And they don't do anything about it. And most times they don't do anything about it because they don't know what to do about it.
Right. No, that's very true. And that's one of the biggest things is when people get into car accidents. That's one of the biggest injuries. And when people go to see doctors or they go to see chiropractors or the one that it's usually because they've been in some type of injury like a car accident.
Yep.
And now, they're left with permanent injuries that last them a lifetime, and
Well, and they're being sued. I mean, and whoever caused that car accident is going to be sued. So if
right.
you don't have your assets in a protected structure, everything you work for is now on the table.
It's
And
true.
I could not live like that. I mean, but my husband and I, our assets are so locked down. You go ahead and sue me. You can sue me all you want. I can't prevent anybody from suing me. They can sue me because they don't like the look, of my hairstyle, but they can't take any of my money. I can tell you that right now. So,
Right. What would be some of the advice that you have, to, especially when it comes to advisors? Like, you have 26 things that you teach. What are some important things out of that 26 that you think that, financial advisors should understand and know?
well, they need to know all 26. But here's the thing. This is the really fun part about what I teach, because sometimes financial advisors go, that seems overwhelming. So I give an analogy. Stacey, right now I'm in my home in Utah. I split my time between Park City, Utah, and then I have a home in Dallas.
Hmm.
And when I'm in Texas, I have a beautiful big home here in Park City. But when I'm in Texas, I have a property manager that comes around. His name is Harry. And Harry
Hmm.
walks the perimeter of my house looking for any problems. He also goes into my home. He flushes all the toilets. He turns on the faucets. He's looking for leaks. Well,
Right.
about a year and a half ago, Harry called me up and said, Erin, we got two problems at your house. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? What's wrong, Harry? He said, well, one of your downstairs toilets, it's got a leak in it. He goes, if we don't get that fixed, you could have a massive flood in your basement. That's a four or $500,000 problem. And I've had neighbors here have that happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, Harry. And then he also said, I also checked some of your heat tape on your roof is not working. So if we have another big snowfall like we had in 2022, your roof could literally collapse. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Harry, that's awful, right? But
Yeah.
here's the thing, and this is for your financial advisors, because a lot of times, what I teach, they think I'm not going to know how to fix that problem. You don't need to know how to fix all the problems that I help you identify. You want to be,
Right.
the paradigm shift is pretend you're a property manager, which is what we are as advisors. Because
Yes.
Harry, not for a minute did Harry get on his hands and knees and fix my toilet. He
Right.
called in another professional called a plumber who did that. Harry
Right.
did not get up in a ladder and fix my heat tape. He called in another resource, an electrician, to do that. So advisors, if you're out there, or any professional, it's kind of like our job is to spot weaknesses, vulnerabilities that might exist in our clients' financial lives, and then bring in other professionals to fix those problems. So that property manager analogy is probably the best one I can give so that advisors can take a deep breath and say, I don't need to know, I don't need to have a CFP, I don't need to have a law degree, I don't need to be a CPA. I just need to identify, hey, I'm not even sure, but I think there may be a problem with that titling and that structuring or that whatever, right? And then
Yes.
bring in outside professionals who are qualified to fix those problems.
Yes. No, that's an excellent analogy. You need to be prepared for all things, and especially when you have a home and you have a property, you need to be able to have someone, especially if you're not living there all the time, to check on these things because
Yeah.
anything could happen. It's so easy. I've known people that have, they've had homes in different locations. There's been storms. Their house has been flooded. Their first floor was completely flooded.
Yeah.
You never know, and you have to be on top of these things. And it's
Yeah.
so important. It's so important. So what are some other aspects that you feel that is necessary for people to really understand and realize?
Yeah. One thing I would say is sit with your family, and regardless of who you are, what you do, sit with your family and think about doing a 360-degree evaluation of your family. For instance,
Hmm.
I'll give you an idea. So I have one son, he's 41 years old. He was in the military for a long time, and he had a wife and he had three little kids. Well, and when I did my 360, now this is 15, 20 years ago, I realized the military only paid him 400, if he died, they only paid him $400,000 in life insurance. Well, what would his wife and three kids, how long would they live on $400,000, right? And so, my son at the time, he was 26 at the time. He's like, Mom, I can't afford. It's all I can do to pay my bills and keep a roof over our head. So Bob and I, we bought a $2 million life insurance term life policy on my son. And because the problem is the risk is mine. If something happens to my son, I mean, God forbid, and he did 200 combat missions, three tours to Iraq, three in Afghanistan, I worried every day. But the financial ramifications would have fallen on me, right? And I love my grandchildren, but I don't want to raise them. We also
Right.
realized that my daughter-in-law at the time, she was like 25, and let's say for a moment something happened to her. She died of a car accident, whatever. I knew that the military would still require my son to deploy, right? That doesn't change the mission. So we were
Right.
able to put like $1 million of life insurance on my daughter-in-law. So that gave us a lot of comfort. God forbid they should happen. At least financially, it's not going to devastate and then fall back on us. Because the story I told right off the top, when that 41-year-old kid died, my clients' plans were just put on hold. They
Yes.
became the caregiver. So the wife had to go back to work and they shuttled kids around for 15 years. By the time they were going to go back and try and pursue their travel, the guy's health, it deteriorated so much, they never did get to travel. And think about it. They had four kids. They had a lot of money. They could have afforded to put life insurance on all four kids and their spouses. And their
Yeah.
life and their dreams could have gone on. It would have been devastating, but not 15 years of devastation. So for your listeners, do a 360. Talk about your mom and dad. What happens if something happens to them? Do you have to make arrangements for them to possibly move in with you? What's that going to cost? Would it be cheaper to buy long-term care insurance on both mom and dad? What about your brothers and sisters? Is there anybody that's going to come and especially people who are wealthier, we tend to take on the with great honor the problems of our family, but
Right.
I'd rather buy a long-term care insurance on all of my siblings and their spouses than have to
Yeah.
pay 14,000 a month because they have to go to a home, right? think about your moms, your dads, your brothers, your sisters, your nieces, your nephew. Really do a 360 on what could go wrong. What situation might occur that you're the only one with money. The people that have the money are the ones that end up having to, out of a moral obligation, take care of their family members. So there's so many ways to mitigate those buying long-term care insurance, that's called leverage. You pay a little tiny bit of money to make sure you don't have to spend 14,000 a month. Term life
Exactly.
insurance on your adult children, oh my gosh, I'd do it every single day of my life, you know? So there making sure that there's 529 plans so your grandchildren can go to college. And but so again, if you will just do a 360 and include the people that you care about, you can save yourself a lot of heartache. And that's what I teach advisors how to do. So if you have an advisor that hasn't talked to you about this, tell them to give me a call. My name is Erin Botsford, erinbotsford.com, and I will be happy to share with them how I learned and what I teach so that they can be better advisors to you.
Yes. Now, if you had to take today's conversation, you really want to emphasize on some important factors, what are some of the things you really like to emphasize so listeners understand?
Well, yeah, again, focus, before you start investing in Bitcoin and thinking that all you have to focus on is what's happening in the stock market. Focus on the other side, the risk side of the balance sheet. I can't stress that enough. Make sure your advisor
Yeah.
has gone through all 26 areas and focused on the risk side because one false move, one car accident, you are only one car accident of being sued and losing everything that you've worked for. And life is too short and there's so many solutions. So I would say make sure that you're focused on that side of the balance sheet.
And where can people, I know you just mentioned your website and everything, but just again, so make sure everybody knows, where can they find you?
Yeah, I can be found. My name is erinbotsford.com, ERINBOTSFORD.com. And I have a training program for advisors. I don't actually practice myself anymore, but I've trained thousands of advisors so that they can be better advisors and they can make sure that they're serving their clients so that their clients never have to deal with these unexpected vulnerabilities that wreak havoc in their lives.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this. I think it's really important because people don't realize they don't think about life insurance. They don't think about the what ifs. They don't think about what could actually happen and the risk involved. And there are many times also that I've seen people that that they've gotten sick and the amount of money that they had to spend to help their parents or to help the person who became ill and something went wrong is outrageous. If you look at today's costs, a person could make over $100,000 a year, and it would cost that much money just to take care of that one person if they had to outsource that person to a different type of care unit where they need assistance, 24/7.
Yep.
So
Yep. Well,
these
a
are things.
friend of mine, a month ago today, was driving to work and he got T-boned and he died on impact. So, it happens, and we can't help the accidents. We can't help the heart attacks. But we can do is make sure that whoever's left behind is financially stable. And for those of us who love our families, we should make sure that we take some time and make sure that gets done.
100%. I agree. 100%. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing this information. And I really appreciate it because a lot of people don't think about these things. And a lot of people don't, think about the risk involved and how sometimes, it could just by taking, spending a few dollars for life insurance and a few dollars to cover the costs, you could be saving an eternal amount of burden off you and your family members because everybody gets affected when things like this happen. So I thank you so much for coming on the show and bringing this to light. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Pleasure.